Welcome to the Pro Football Couch Podcast. I'm Connor. We got Braden in the middle, and we got Rye producing this thing over on the right. Today, we're going to be talking about some NFL coach firing news. Not really news, I guess, yet because the season hasn't started, but we got a little bit of betting odds on who's going to be the first one to go. So, first, I want to get into an article here from the Draft Network. Basically talks about a couple days ago, Justin Mello, the guy that kind of created the Draft Network. He believed that Matt Rule would be the first head coach to be fired in the 2022 season. This guy says Cliff Kingsbury will be the first to go. So his point goes on to say it's very easy to point out that Rule has been a more than likely candidate to be fired first. He's the favorite with plus 300 odds, which is pretty high because he's overseen an era of Carolina football that has been completely without success. Since taking over for Ron Rivera, Rule has led the Panthers to a 10-23 record with little hope on the horizon. For whatever reason, he still seems to have a really good relationship with Panthers owner David Tepper. And Tepper said he would potentially give him up to 6 years to figure things out. So what do we think about Matt Rule being the betting favorite to be the first fired?
That's a long time. It's a long time the owner gave him just to get things going,
Yeah.
How long has he been?
So he's been there for 2 full years. This is going to be his third. When Matt Rule originally had signed on, he signed a 7-year contract.
No, I think if he's got a good relationship with the owner and they're giving him 6 years. I mean, they don't. Some people don't always stick with that, but I think Cliff's probably going to be the one on out, even though they just extended him.
Yeah, Cliff Kingsbury, too, like you mentioned, was just signed to an extension, 6 years in the offseason.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not super uncommon for coaches to be fired after signing a major extension. If we want to take a look back to Jeff Fisher, former Rams coach before Sean McVay took over, Jeff Fisher was signed to a big extension, and the next game he could not figure out where he put his challenge flag. He was fired like a couple weeks later.
Yeah.
So it's definitely not uncommon. I do think that's interesting, though, that Cliff Kingsbury is, according to this person, that he's the first one to go.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I find that interesting. I don't think he'll be the first one out. I mean, he might be, but again, that relationship with the owner is it's a strong bond, and it's kind of hard to break a strong bond, What's Cliff? Cliff has been like the same season over and over again, right?
Yeah.
Pretty much, except for that first year, just because they had a brand new Kyler Murray. But
well, and if you look back on the college days of Cliff Kingsbury, he basically did the same thing. He'd start off really hot with Patrick Mahomes.
Mm-hmm.
He started off super hot, and then all of a sudden at the end of the year, he would just kind of fall off.
You couldn't even win with Patrick Mahomes.
Exactly.
What the heck?
They made him sound like he was this big time offensive guru too, so that I don't see it. I never really saw it from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And now with them signing Kyler Murray to a big extension, we'll see if they can make things work with that. And I just don't see the Cardinals being successful long term with Cliff Kingsbury.
Mm-hmm.
Bit of breaking news here on the podcast. DK Metcalf, 3 years, $72 million extension with the Seattle Seahawks. So DK Metcalf staying in Seattle for another 3 seasons.
You got paid. He deserved it. Honestly, I think they got him for pretty cheap.
That is a pretty good deal because it's less than $25 million a year on average value. So
Right.
I almost kind of wonder if Seattle, obviously we won't know the terms of the contract for a little while, but I almost kind of wonder if Seattle will front load it so then in a couple of years when they have a chance to go all in,
Oh, they
then they
definitely will, because that's when they're getting. That's when they're going to be done with all their picks that they got for Russ.
yeah.
Just 3 first-round picks.
So good deal that we got to break that here on the show. And now let's move on to Seattle with Pete Carroll. So I have a list here of different coaches that I think are going to get fired throughout the year. And only made a 5-man list, but at number 5 is Pete Carroll up there in the Pacific Northwest. So, Braden, I got a question for you.
We
What's more
got,
likely to happen here? Pete Carroll retire or will he be fired by the end of the season?
dude, he's going to want to retire as a Seahawk.
I think so too.
Yeah, he's been with that. What he was with the Patriots before the Seahawks, right? Or no,
Yeah.
he was with the Patriots. But he's had such a legacy at the Seahawks, winning that Super Bowl and then going back to the Super Bowl. Making that horrible call at the goal line, which it's not talked about. But I
And
mean, go ahead.
obviously, he had his, debacle with USC where he was supposedly buying stuff for players or paying for them, and then they won the national championship. But yeah, his legacy in the NFL has been crazy. He's like you said, he's been to 2 Super Bowls, so
Mm-hmm.
I don't see him being fired. I mean, it wouldn't do Seattle any good to fire him mid-season anyways, even if they are struggling. He should just retire at the end of the year. And then number 4 on my list we've already talked about, Cliff Kingsbury. Number 3 I got in Dallas, Mike McCarthy. So Mike McCarthy spent past couple of years with the Dallas Cowboys. They've been kind of meh. I mean, they made to the playoffs last year, won the division, but then ultimately lost to San Francisco, a wild card team at home. So my biggest thing with McCarthy is I heard that he doesn't call plays or he doesn't really manage the clock at all. So it's like, what are you even doing? Like, are you just here for moral support? I mean, Kellen Moore's calling all their offensive plays. They got Dan Quinn calling all the defense.
Right.
So it doesn't really make much sense to keep McCarthy there long term either. And at the end of the playoff game against the 49ers, obviously that was mostly Kellen Moore who called the play where they called the quarterback draw and then ultimately couldn't spike it.
Mm-hmm.
McCarthy, I'm sure, still has to sign off on some of this stuff, especially in that kind of situation.
Yeah, definitely. Dude's an offensive guy. So I wouldn't expect him to take a defensive role in any standpoint. Maybe if it's like a end of game situation, like I don't know. Let's compare this to like the Jets and the Raiders. What was it last year or the last 2 years? I don't remember what it was. Where they literally blitzed on the last play on the Hail Mary, and the Raiders scored a touchdown. I could
Mm-hmm.
probably see him taking action in that, but that's about it. Otherwise, he's just a freaking, excuse my French, but he's basically a cheerleader on the sideline. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah.
And I guess that can work in some instances, but like Dallas, they're just ready to go. Like last year, they had
They have
Amari.
everything they need.
Yeah, they had Amari Cooper last year. Ended up trading him away. Lost Cedric Wilson too in the offseason. There's just a lot of different pieces that Dallas lost on offense that they are going to have to try to make up now in some way.
Right.
And I don't see them winning their division this year.
Who do you think could beat them? Who do you think could beat them out? Other than the football team, which I see the only way they win every year is just by being underrated, you know?
My money has got to be on Philadelphia.
Yeah.
I really like what they did in the draft. I really, really like how they managed their offseason. In my opinion, like Philadelphia would be a top 3 sneaky contender to watch this year.
Yeah, they are the underdogs.
But yeah, Dallas is lucky that they're in a weak division. Let's say that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely acquiring AJ Brown is going to do something, especially with
Yeah,
Jalen Hurts. What is it? It's his third year, right? Jalen
yeah.
Hurts.
Second full year as a starter.
Yeah,
All
yeah. I
right.
think I think the Eagles are going to have a good year.
Number 2 on my list for coaches to be fired, Riverboat Ron Rivera. Now, Rivera had pretty much one successful run in Carolina where he took them to the Super Bowl at 15-1 record. And, he got a division championship for Washington with a losing record. So if you look at it, this is going into year 3. They haven't had a winning record yet under him in Washington. So to me, them hitching their wagon to Carson Wentz, this is pretty much it for Ron Rivera. He's going to give it one last go this year and then see if they can make it to the playoffs. But if they don't make it to the playoffs, I think we're talking about Washington looking for a new coach next year.
I mean, I don't know. I don't do the whole insight thing about Ron Rivera and coaches like that, but he's been in this business long enough. I think he might be ready to put up the cleats or the clipboard, I guess you'd say, for a coach.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, dude's been in the league for a long time. Washington, I just don't see them growing. They have Chase Young, that's about it, and Antonio Gibson, and Terry McLaurin, but I mean that's about it. That's all you got. So
Yeah, Washington's got a pretty dominant defensive line, and they kind of have for like
mhm.
the past 2 or 3 years. Obviously with Chase Young, but Chase Young missed quite a good portion of last year with an injury.
Yeah,
So now coming back this year, is he going to be the same player? But I think if Washington can find a strength at all on their team, it'd have to be in their defensive line and their pass rush. And then at number 1, we already talked about him too, Matt Rule. So Matt Rule, kind of feeling like this could be the end, but from that article, maybe not. I mean, teams, if they have a connection with a certain coach or player, they'll hold on to them and just hope that they can pull it together. But last year, obviously, with the Sam Darnold trade, that kind of seemed like, oh, Sam Darnold gets a fresh start. And he didn't necessarily have the greatest weapons in the world. Robbie Anderson was kind of non existent. I wonder how much of that was just because Sam Darnold was terrible. But they seem to start off pretty good every year. Like they started out 3-0 last year.
mm-hmm.
And they don't quite have the same kind of stretch as Kingsbury does, where they go multiple games of like halfway through the season before they fall off. They typically have like a strong 3 or 4 first games, and then they don't ever put anything together and don't ever come near pushing for the playoffs. So now this year with Baker Mayfield, it kind of feels like they're trying to redo or undo what they did last year with Sam Darnold. And it kind of came as a panic move too, in my opinion, because they were almost seemed like they were kind of banking on the draft this past year to
Mm-hmm.
build up their quarterback room, and just nobody was really that worthy of going where they were sitting up at number 6. So then they end up taking Matt Carrell in the 3rd round. And so it just kind of feels like one of those things where, they've made a move at the quarterback, and quarterback's always the last hope to try to save your job.
Yeah, it's kind of concerning because I saw something today about Matt Carrell saying that in practice it seems like he might be the future of this program. Now, you just signed Baker Mayfield, the number 1 overall pick, to give him a fresh start like you did with Sam Darnold last year. So I don't know if you realize that you made a mistake or not, but like, what are you gonna do, right? You got Sam Darnold on this huge contract that he's not gonna talk down. Like you're not gonna renegotiate or anything like that. So you're stuck in that. And then you got Baker, and then I guess that situation isn't too bad because didn't the Browns say that they'd take like half of it or almost all of it.
They end up taking a good portion of it before they let him go. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I guess that ain't too bad. But I mean, what do you got to lose? The team's not very good. So
And Darnold and Mayfield are both on their 5th-year options right now. So
they're from the same draft, right?
yeah, so
Okay.
that could potentially be like hey, Matt Carrell's just going to redshirt this year, and then we'll see next year. But the thing that really concerns me is I saw too from Matt Carrell that he said he chose going to Ole Miss over any other school because there wasn't any quarterback competition there.
Mm.
And it just anytime a quarterback says that they went somewhere because of lack of competition, or a quarterback performed well somewhere, or they couldn't perform well somewhere because they got beat out by somebody else, it always concerns me. Like the thing of Jalen Hurts getting beat out at Alabama by Tua, that's something that's always concerning to me. Like, okay, if he couldn't beat out this guy, then how's he going to make it in the NFL?
So Carrell said that he went to Ole Miss because there was no competition.
Right.
Huh.
Basically, he then went on to say that he regretted his decision and knew that he was capable of winning a quarterback battle somewhere with his level of play. And it kind of makes me wonder, had Matt Carrell not went to Ole Miss, would we even be talking about him right now? Because nobody would probably know his name. He could have been buried on somebody's depth chart in college.
Right.
So, but I guess we'll see. Obviously we got the preseason. It's always good to watch a quarterback beat up on a bunch of 4th and 5th stringers.
Mm-hmm.
But Matt Carrell, yeah, it's possible that he could take the redshirt year and then maybe go next year with him, similar to like Malik Willis. We don't know what Tennessee's going to do with that, but it kind of looks like that's what they're wanting to do too.
Yeah, I think Malik might take Tannehill's job. But
Yeah,
we'll see. He could be a bust, but dude looks like he can be capable of anything. He's got a good arm. He can run.
right.
Just see how accurate he is.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how this year's quarterback class ends up working out, because obviously none of them really stood out enough for anybody
Mm-hmm.
to get drafted highly other than Kenny Pickett.
Everyone's got a quarterback,
Right.
I mean, the only ones I could think of are little Steelers, and they got Pickett in the first round. But other than that, that's pretty much it. And the Texans already bought into Davis Mills. I mean, he pretty much had the best rookie season out of all the quarterbacks. So, I mean, there's that.
Right. It's just, it gets kind of hard to kind of predict where these guys are going to go or how their futures are going to play out.
Right.
But I want to quickly bring here before the end of the show. So the betting odds for head coaches being fired, the first head coach should be fired this year. The odds are kind of surprising to me for a couple of these guys, because I just don't think they should be fired or even in the conversation. So obviously we talked about Matt Rule is plus 300 to be fired first. Then we got Mike McCarthy at plus 500. Pete Carroll at plus 600. Frank Reich plus 700. Ron Rivera plus 800. And then Kevin Stefanski 10-1. Dan Campbell 10-1. Cliff Kingsbury 12-1. I think his odds should be a little bit higher than that. But all the way down here towards the bottom, we got Mike Vrabel at 12-1.
No, Vrabel's staying there forever, dude. He's like Dan Campbell. He's got culture. He knows how to build a team. But what would you say it was?
He's got 12-1 odds, and to put that in perspective, right below him is Robert Saleh and Arthur Smith, both with 14-1 odds.
Oh well, they're brand new coaches, so it's like, well, Saleh's been there a year, but
I could potentially build a case to fire Robert Saleh at the end of the year more than I could for Mike Vrabel. I mean,
I think that's fine. I think because the Jets are an upcoming team. They're building their team good. And we talked about last episode how they built all these little pieces and they're slowly building up. Maybe not next year, but the year after that, I think they'll be a decent team.
Yeah, they're a year away from being a year away.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's interesting for me to look at some of these odds because I wouldn't have put Mike Vrabel on that list at all
No, I wouldn't either.
if I was to
Honestly,
make.
if I would put I'm a Colts fan, but I put Frank Reich before Mike Vrabel. I'm not
Yeah,
even joking when I say that.
and it looks like Frank Reich is number 4. Still, I don't
Oh,
get
he
that
is.
one.
He
Yeah,
is. Oh, I
yeah.
didn't hear that. Whoops.
I still
What?
don't get it though that Frank Reich would be fired either. I think
What
there's a
was?
lot of guys on the list that would be
What
fired
was that
before
one
him.
I was thinking? It was a Stefanski before Cliff.
Yeah,
Yeah. What's up with that? Oh my gosh.
it just. I think the Browns made a mistake by hitching their wagon to Deshaun Watson this year.
I don't even know if that was his decision though. That could have been the front office decision. You know how impulsive they are.
Yeah, that's what really sucks too. Is like, unfortunately, I think Kevin Stefanski will be a victim of the front office's decision if Deshaun Watson doesn't work out.
Well, even if he would get fired just because of a bad season, I mean, I'm sure he'd get a job somewhere else. He's a
Yeah,
good coach. He's a really good coach.
yeah,
Maybe not the greatest, but he knows what he's doing.
he he was pretty. He was Teams were pretty active in the coaching market looking for him
Mm-hmm.
specifically. I remember when back in 2019 when he put the Vikings in the top 10 of offense and kind of seemed like that Vikings 49ers game was going to come down to whoever won that got the Browns job.
He took
But
over Pat Shermer, right?
um, there were a few different coordinators thrown in there somewhere. I think.
And this is the Eagles guy, the Eagles
Yeah.
quarterback. Yeah, I think
What was
like
his
D
name? Oh,
Filippo.
John
D Filippo.
DiFilippo. Yeah.
Yeah,
John DiFilippo.
he didn't turn
Never.
out well, dude. I
No.
thought he was gonna be. I thought he was the perfect fit because they just got off the Super Bowl. You know,
Yeah.
it didn't last long.
Yeah. But regardless, Kevin Stefanski's name is on this list. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll have to see how the season plays out for all these guys. It's very possible that guys that we wouldn't have even imagined at all get fired. Like, let's say somebody has a really, really bad year. Down in Houston, I could see them pulling the cord on Lovie Smith early. They have a really bad year because they kind of just did that to David Cauley too. I mean,
Well, David Cauley was kind of like, all right, don't quote me on this, but the one and done situation was kind of sketch because I don't even think they knew that they wanted to hire him when they did.
I think it is kind of bizarre that they hired him because David Cauley is kind of old.
Right.
So like to throw him in there when you're planning on
I mean, most coaches are old. Like, look at Andy Reid and what Pete Carroll. Was he the oldest coach or the second oldest coach?
yeah, David Culley's right up there though. I think he's like 70. So they ended up throwing him into the situation. So the Texans, they had to know, unless they have absolutely no idea and they're clueless, that this is going to be like a 4, 5, 6 year rebuild. You're not going to throw in a 70-year-old coach to do that.
What was his role before that? Like,
I don't remember. I know that he had several different roles throughout the league. Let me pull it up.
like
But
just imagine you're 70-year-old assistant coach or something like that, or you're just like a linebackers coach and then like, yo, want to interview for this head coaching job? Sure. Oh, you got it. And like, took me 70 years to get this. What the heck?
so David Culley is 66.
Okay. Well,
Prior to that, he was assistant head coach, wide receivers coach, and passing game coordinator in Baltimore, then quarterbacks coach in Buffalo. So,
he's
yeah,
that Josh Allen dude. He created Josh Allen.
I'm going to give Dable a little bit more credit for that than
Yeah,
David
probably.
Culley. But yeah, it's kind of weird that they decided to do that. And then now they're going with somebody else who isn't exactly young either in Lovie Smith. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. Texans they don't seem to know what's going on.
Right. I don't know. I think they're kind of like the Jets. I think they made a wise move. I think they're getting smarter. They'll be on the merge of growing and being better again. That's all I know. I can feel it. I can feel the tension. They're getting better.
Might have to get a little worse first, but you know,
Hey, I'm fine with that as long as my Colts are beating them every single year, 2-0.
yeah,
I'm fine with that.
yeah. Unfortunately for the Texans, it might be a few years before they really can make a fight at all in the division.
Hey, but Davis Dimes, he's something. He
Yeah.
is an underdog.
All right. Well, I think we can go ahead and put the wrap on this show.
All right.
We are powered by StreamYard, as you can see in the top corner of your screen. Thank you to StreamYard for
Thank
their
you. Thank you.
streaming service. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. We will see you next time.
Adios.